Our first live mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders, and we're getting it started with the most important position of them all, the quarterback. That's right now on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Commanders fans, of the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, so please subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you always get the latest episodes whenever they drop, including these live episodes as we're doing right here today on this Friday to help kick you off into the weekend, hopefully on a good note. Hopefully you've had a good week and are looking forward to an even better weekend. It's raining out here where I am, but hopefully where you are, the weather is just a little bit better. I'm David Harrison, credentialed member of the media covering the Commanders for Commander Country, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. You can find me there or here or on Twitter at dharrison82. And I want to thank you for making this show your first listen or your first view of the day. We're going to discuss a potential training camp competition for the first time this offseason, really. Say goodbye to a fan favorite and revisit my mock Chase Young trade and draft. But first, we're going to kick off our first mailbag episode with the most important position on the football field, and that, of course, is the quarterback position. And our first question comes to us from Brennan in the email box. Let me drop this logo here. And Brennan wrote in to lockedoncommanders@gmail.com. Hey, David, love your podcast and listen regularly. I also like the idea of a mailbag episode, which should be incredibly entertaining. I'm a 47-year-old guy living outside of Philadelphia, but grew up on the West Coast as a fan of Washington since a very early age. First, a comment, and then my question. After well over 20 years of embarrassing ownership, we are mere inches from the finish line. I would prefer the Harris Group, but really don't care at this point. It would be humanly impossible for anyone to screw things up as bad as Danny the Sailor Man. I am literally throwing a party when this sale is complete. Question. Do you see Sam holding on to the quarterback one role and starting the season under center? I know there isn't much evidence either way, but I was looking for your thoughts. I've heard recent comments that Sam would have more than likely gone much higher in the draft had it not been the COVID draft era. I don't know if he'll be a franchise QB. I don't have a crystal ball, but I do recognize his talents, which include accuracy and quick decision-making. Tough to teach those things. I'm going to save this email and look back after next year's season and predict Sam starts in week 1 and plays the entire season, winning 10 games. My best, Brennan, the lone Philly Commander. So, Brennan, I appreciate you shooting me that message in the email. Again, that's lockedoncommanders@gmail.com. So a lot to unpack there. First of all, I appreciate you listening, appreciate you coming through and viewing the show as well when you do. 20 years is a long time. And yeah, hopefully that path is coming to an end very, very soon. League meetings beginning next week. So hopefully we get some solid news on that sooner rather than later. Of course, everybody, media, fans, honestly, there's a lot of people probably working in that building that can't say so publicly, but are waiting on that news as well. So I think everybody's kind of looking forward to when that finally happens. As far as your question and whether or not Sam Howell will hold on to the QB1 role at the beginning of the season. Up front, yes, I do believe that Sam Howell is going to be the QB1 when the regular season begins. We already know just from what the Washington Commanders were telling offensive coordinator candidates as they were going through and interviewing the guy, and then eventually hiring Eric Bieniemy to be their new offensive coordinator, assistant head coach, that they were telling everybody, like, you know, what's kind of your vision, what's kind of your plan if Sam Howell is the starting quarterback, because that's what he's going to be as the offseason program gets underway later this spring, and then obviously into the summer and then the early fall. So that part is already kind of done. And that to me is kind of the biggest part of whether or not the writing's on the wall that Sam Howell is going to be the starting quarterback to begin the regular season, because all of the performances you see, even in training camp, even in the preseason, all of them have to be taken with a big grain of salt, because and this is something that head coach Ron Rivera talked about several times during last year's training camp, is there's no game planning here. Like the Washington Commanders, you know, let's say they play the Baltimore Ravens week 1 in the preseason. There is no game plan. Like, they're not going out there saying, okay, how do we stop Lamar Jackson? How do we counter their defense and put points on the board against their guys? That's not really what they're out there doing. They're out there trying to install their offense, figure out which one of their players can follow what they're telling them to do. And so they're really just kind of going through installing what the Washington Commanders want to be from a characteristic standpoint. And then you're also not tipping your hand too much on playbook. So when you are playing through a preseason game, if your starters play more than a quarter, which, more and more these days, they don't even do that. Young quarterback, you might see a little bit more play out of him come the preseason, but eventually you kind of exhaust what you're going to do for that preseason weekend, you know what I mean, or that week. And things kind of start getting a little bit repetitive, which really gives the advantage to the defensive side of the ball if you ultimately think of things. So there's a lot of other signs too, though. So not just the early offseason message being tilted towards Sam before Jacoby Brissett signed on, but we also found out shortly after the signing of Taylor Heinicke out in Atlanta that the plan was for Taylor Heinicke to come back to Washington. He kind of hinted as much in some Super Bowl Radio Row interviews that maybe a deal was kind of in the works or being talked about, but couldn't fully reveal everything that was going on there. And then after, again, he goes to Atlanta, we find out that basically that was the plan. And then in a span of just a couple of days, the Atlanta Falcons come in and just sweep him off of his feet with this amazing offer, and he ends up signing with the Falcons. So if Taylor Heinicke is coming back, is the plan for a true competition, or is the plan for Taylor to be the best backup in the National Football League, which, a lot of emotional and morale support and studying and communication, which is what Taylor Heinicke provided to Ryan Fitzpatrick during the preseason that year, Carson Wentz during the stretch of this year, and then even Sam Howell the 1 week that Sam got to start in 2022. Or did the Washington Commanders really shift in really about a 24-hour period from the time that it was reported Taylor Heinicke was agreeing to terms with the Atlanta Falcons? 24 hours later, Jacoby Brissett is agreeing to terms with the Washington Commanders. So what is the likelihood that the Washington Commanders pivoted in less than 24 hours and said, you know what, we're not going for a backup veteran. We're going for a true competitor as a veteran quarterback acquisition? I would say probably not very likely. You know what I mean? NFL teams don't tend to like to shift that quickly to a different direction. So I think that most likely the plan is still the same as when Heinicke was going to be the backup, and that is a veteran backup to come in. If Sam doesn't pan out, you have a veteran to turn to who's kind of been in those shoes, been in that situation of having to be the relief pitcher, been around a little bit, and both Taylor Heinicke and Jacoby Brissett kind of fill those characteristics. I would argue, I think some people have said that Jacoby has better overall quarterback traits than Taylor Heinicke does. I would argue that is true, although I would say that from what we've seen from Taylor Heinicke's leadership, that probably is why they were going to lean on keeping him versus going outside the organization. Anyway, so that's part of this. The other part of the conversation, or another part of the conversation, Jacoby Brissett starting for this team almost guarantees that this new ownership group is going to fire this coaching staff, because ownership groups come in and they can kind of immediately say, okay, how can we put our mark on this team? How can we determine this team's future is our future? Not necessarily how do we continue the path that we're already on. Not a lot of times is a team sold because it's just amazing, right? Like, it's not usually your best franchises within your pro sports leagues that are getting sold. Now, every team gets sold for various different reasons. Unfortunately, sometimes there's a death involved, all these other things. When you look at the Washington Commanders, this isn't exactly a team that's being sold at the height of performance in the National Football League, right? So it would make sense for a new ownership group to come in and say, well, we want to steer our direction. We want to take the new ship that we just bought. It's already in the waters, but we want to make sure that it sails where we want it to sail. Having a veteran, older quarterback who's traveled and really isn't an established guy, doesn't really have a long-term future, and I'm talking 10 to 15 years type of future, gives them more of a platform, I would say, to go ahead and make widespread changes. But if you have a young quarterback, a second-year quarterback on his rookie contract, guy named Sam Howell, the fans love him. If this comes to fruition, 10, 11 wins, playoff berth, all that stuff, if that comes to fruition, the fans are going to be behind him. The team is going to be behind him. He's going to have the DC, DMV area kind of a buzz, right? Do you really want to move on from that young quarterback? And if you don't want to move on from that young quarterback, do you want to move on from the coaching staff that is helping him have all this success, right? And I think those questions go hand in hand. Not saying it guarantees that this coaching staff doesn't get fired, but if you bring in Jacoby Brissett, even if you make it to the playoffs, this ownership group can still say, okay, well, we'll keep Jacoby. We'll do another 1 or 2 year deal with Jacoby. We'll bring in a new coaching staff. We'll draft a new young quarterback, and we'll move forward with that direction. And eventually our guy will be the starting quarterback here, and our mentality, our kind of image of this organization will take place. I look back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when they drafted Jameis Winston. Lovie Smith was the head coach in 2015. Jameis comes in as a rookie, had some promise, right? Obviously didn't work out eventually, but had some promise. After the 2015 season, offensive coordinator Dirk Cutter was getting a lot of head coaching buzz. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers fired Lovie Smith, made Dirk Cutter the head coach because they did not want to lose that offensive coach quarterback combination. Now, in this situation, could be EB getting a promotion to head coach, and then Ron Rivera actually gets sent packing. But you understand, as far as the totality of the coaching staff, their best chance of surviving the ownership change at the end of this coming regular season is to start Sam Howell and to find success with Sam Howell. So yes, I do believe Sam Howell for a multitude of reasons, and talent-wise, I do believe that Sam could pull it off as well in a fair competition. We're going to know. I mean, you guys are going to be there as fans at training camp, the media. You know, we're going to give our honest opinions of what's going on the practice field. So if Sam is just clear and above, not the better quarterback of the two, we're going to tell you. You know what I mean? I like Sam, got to know him really well. But you know, if at the end of the day, Jacoby's the better guy for the job, I'm not going to hide that from you guys here on the Locked On Commanders podcast. So that question answered. Appreciate the first question on our first live mailbag here on Locked On Commanders. If Washington could go back, though, would Ron Rivera still put Carson Wentz back in as the starting quarterback? I can't imagine he would. But will I change my post-Chase Young mock trade draft when asked by one of you about not picking a specific position group of need? We're going to find that out right here next on today's live episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're going to do so thanks to Built Bar. The Built March Madness bracket is here. We know you have your fan favorites, your favorite Built Bar, your favorite Built Puff, and now is your time to make it count. Go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorites. We're in the Sweet 16. I'm taking peanut butter brownie, cookie dough bar, brownie batter puffs, mint brownie bar, and you know I'm taking lemon dipped cheesecake puffs because to me, that's the GOAT. You talk about LeBron and MJ. For me, lemon dipped cheesecake puffs is both as it comes for Built Bar products. And if you want your favorite to win, then you need to get in and get voting for that bar as well. Support your team, support your bar, and support your favorite Built Puff. And when you vote for your favorite Built product, you will be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners are going to get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one of you is going to get a free 12-month subscription to Built and have the best products delivered monthly straight to your door. Built Bars are the best tasting protein bars you will ever try. If you have not tried them yet, you need to because they're delicious, covered in 100% real chocolate, packing all kinds of protein, yet low in sugar and low in carbs. Run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now and vote for your favorite Built Bar or your Built Puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop on in and support your favorite Built product. Thanks again for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen or view of the day. I am your host, David Harrison. Put my name up on the screen for those of you joining me live here on YouTube. For those of you watching afterwards or listening afterwards, greatly appreciate you as well as always. So shout out to Brendan for that first question. If you've got a question that you want to get in that you didn't get in before this episode, drop it in the live chat or drop it in the comment box after this. We've always got another mailbag episode coming up, hoping to make this a weekly thing. But of course, in order to have a weekly mailbag, I got to have mail. So if you guys have questions you want to throw in, by all means, drop them in there, or you hit me up in email or in DM form that we will talk about here later. So should the Commanders bring in competition for kicker Joey Slye? And if so, who are the top candidates to do so? That's coming up later here on this episode. But right now, we need to hear from Michael, who is curious about some of the other options I could have and maybe even should have considered in my mock Chase Young trade and draft episode. So in case you missed it, I did an episode just this week where I essentially asked the question, what should the Washington Commanders do with Chase Young and Montez Sweat, given that they just re-signed Daron Payne? Kind of went over that earlier in our losers episode of the first wave of free agency and just the cap implications of trying to keep this entire defensive line in one piece and intact. To me, just does not seem feasible. So what we ended up doing is kind of exploring the idea that maybe Chase Young eventually gets traded. It's happened not a whole lot in history where a top 5 pick, especially a top 5 edge rusher, is traded before the end of his rookie deal, but it has happened before. So we did a little bit of case study, kind of came up with some things, some draft value that we might be able to get for Chase Young, and then we went ahead and did a mock draft. In response to that mock draft, Michael Robertson in the YouTube comments of that episode came through and basically said, no linebackers available at your pick positions, ? So basically just asking me why I did not take any linebackers in this mock draft following the trade of Chase Young. So to recap kind of the picks that we did make, we got offensive tackle Anton Harrison out of Oklahoma. We got Northwestern edge Adetomiwa Adebawore. We got Illinois safety Sidney Brown. We got Zach Evans, running back out of Ole Miss. And then we got center Olusegun Oluwatimi out of Michigan with the final pick. We didn't go through all 7 rounds. We went through the top 4 rounds, ended up with 5 picks in those 4 rounds. I got some pretty good guys, to be quite honest with you. I think even Olusegun Oluwatimi out of Michigan, the interior offensive lineman center, maybe you cross-train him to be a guard. You got Nick Gates in there, so you got some position versatility. I liked the class. Some of you even liked the class, and I appreciated that as well. But Michael did ask, why no linebackers? Why didn't we get a linebacker in this mock? So going through my notes from this mock draft, yes, Michael, there were linebackers available at each pick. They were at the number 24 overall pick. So we traded out of 16. We went back. We dropped down to number 24. Some of you like that trade. Some of you did not like that trade. That's okay. But we traded back to number 24. The best linebacker available at that pick was Washington State linebacker Deion Henley. Number 47, Arkansas linebacker Drew Sanders. Number 56, Clemson linebacker Trenton Simpson. Number 122, Oregon linebacker Noah Sewell. And at 125, just a few picks later, Indiana linebacker Cam Jones, who's not on the picture. Again, number 122, number 125, very, very close. So if we're going to take a linebacker, if Noah Sewell is good enough to trump anybody else at 122, certainly good enough to trump anybody at 125. So those were the linebackers that were available. Now let's kind of go through this as we look back at that mock draft, and let's talk about why we didn't go linebacker here. So I'm going to tell you first and foremost up front, what we saw in 2022 from Jack Del Rio's defense, to me, looks like these indication and signal that linebacker is just not going to be considered as important or as critical of a position for this Washington Commanders defense that maybe some of us thought that it might be. Jamin Davis coming in as a first-round draft pick. I think pretty much everybody expected him to, if not right away, eventually become the starting Mike linebacker. That didn't really come to fruition. You end up with Cole Holcomb out there. Now he gets injured. And an interesting thing that happened is when he got injured, they neither shifted Jamin Davis really to like that full-time Mike position or really fully dedicated to like a next man up mentality. They really just kind of shifted their entire scheme and said, you know what, we're really not going to lean on an extra linebacker. We're just going to lean on even more DBs. That's where you kind of saw the rise of Derek Forrest. Bobby McCain eventually drops down kind of into the box as a nickelback. Like just a lot of different things that the Washington Commanders did defensively instead of relying on yet another linebacker. And I just think that from the success that they were able to have from that kind of seems to be the direction that they're just going to keep on going in. So the devaluation of the linebacker position in this defense last season kind of leads me to a little bit of devaluation personally of where I think the Commanders could go in this case. Now, me personally, I still love linebackers. I'm a 3-4 guy at heart, which means I love 2 off-ball linebackers on my defense, but this is not a 3-4 traditional base defense. It's more of a 4-3. They have some 5-man fronts, a lot of DBs, a lot of kind of hybrid linebacker DB types, which Sidney Brown kind of fits that bill. A little bit more DB than he is linebacker, but still a little bit of that big nickel type of player. So that's one reason. But you go down through the list here. Deion Henley, very solid player out of Washington State. Do we take him over offensive tackle Anton Harrison? I don't think you can. Charles Leno Jr., good, consistent, reliable, not great all the time, but definitely serviceable in the league of left tackles. Anton Harrison, more of a right tackle type of guy, but you bring in some competition, you bring in some guys to develop on this offensive line. We've seen this line get way too thin, way too often. I think if you have a guy like this available, you have to pull the trigger on doing that. Round 2, we go Adetomiwa Adebawore instead of Drew Sanders out of Arkansas. Now, look, if Adetomiwa Adebawore out of Northwestern is not on the board, then yeah, I think you really do significantly consider Drew Sanders, because Drew Sanders is certainly one of my favorite off-ball linebackers in this class. But in my mock, Adetomiwa Adebawore out of Northwestern is there, so I go him over Drew Sanders. Remember, we just traded Chase Young in this mock scenario, and so we're looking for a full-time replacement. Do we think James Smith-Williams is a full-time guy? Casey Toohill, I don't want to say fell off, but I think kind of didn't do as well as maybe we kind of hoped last season in some rotational spots. So I like James Smith-Williams, but I do also like the idea of kind of resetting that position with a rookie contract, bring him in, and maybe if we get the best out of him year 2, we've got a very, very dynamic combination of Adetomiwa Adebawore and Montez Sweat playing along with Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen. By the time Adebawore gets to the end of his rookie deal, some of those veteran deals are already coming to roost. Now we can make some decisions on who we want to re-sign, which ones we need to keep moving into the next phase of our franchise success. Sidney Brown, That's probably where I look at possibly going linebacker here is Trenton Simpson out of Clemson, perhaps over Sidney Brown. Excellent linebacker prospect, 6'2", 235, experience starting inside and outside. More of a weak side linebacker, though, than Mike. We kind of already have that with Jamin Davis, so I still don't know if you go there. Plus, I think at the end of it, when you're looking towards the 5th round of this mock, we still had guys like Henry To'o out of Alabama, Ventrell Miller out of Florida, Mahmoud Diabate out of Utah, and Servastier Dennis out of Pitt. There's a lot of good off-ball linebackers. You still get there. Pair them with Cody Barton. Put them behind there with David Mayo as a mentor. Jamin Davis, do all these things. See him develop over the next year or two, maybe into a starting quarterback, or a linebacker. Sorry. Something that the Washington Commanders will certainly love about Simpson. His father's an Army Ranger. You know, the Washington Commanders love their military connections. So getting an Army Ranger's son there, and look, and Simpson's been compared to Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, the linebacker out of Notre Dame that ended up going to the Cleveland Browns. I really liked JOK coming out of college. Would have liked to see them go after him as well. So certainly there's some validity to potentially going linebacker in one of those spots. I'm not going to say that there's not, but just kind of giving you some reasons why I chose in my mock to not go that way. And honestly, at this point in time, I can't look here and say that I would take any of the guys that we got on the board off the board in order to get one of these linebackers. Now, free agency is not done yet. Anything can happen. So if somebody comes in, then we could always revisit that conversation. We'll continue to mock draft Monday. Another one is coming right around the corner. So kicking into the weekend with 4 potential kickers that the Washington Commanders could bring in as competition for Joey Slye. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders. This live episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The NCAA men's tournament is heating up, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers, you get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 and bonus bets if your first bet doesn't pan out. Just download the FanDuel Sports app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And then you can bet on anything from the money line to points scored to threes drained. Wrapping up the men's Sweet 16 Friday night. Today is Friday as this live is firing off. Friday night, we got #1 seed Alabama, 7.5-point favorites over #5 San Diego State. Fellow #1 seed Houston is also 7.5-point favorites over another #5 seed Miami. #6 Creighton is 10.5-point favorites to beat Princeton. Looks like Princeton's time at the dance could be up. And #2 Texas is a 4.5-point favorite to beat #3 Xavier. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at bigger payouts with same-game parlays. So don't miss a chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the National Football League. All right, guys, back now to wrap up this live episode of the Locked On Commanders podcast, a mailbag, our first mailbag episode here. Appreciate all of you who reached out, sent in messages. Didn't get all the messages in, all the questions in, but we will get more, and we will do more of these as well. So please keep sending them in, keep interacting, and we will continue to churn these out. Joey Slye hasn't been perfect as a kicker for the Washington Commanders, but he hasn't been the worst kicker in the National Football League either. Still, the Washington Commanders should absolutely be looking to bring competition in, and Jay wants to know who that competition could be. So on Twitter, via Twitter, at JLord09 in the DMs, says the DM, Jay said, quote, "I'm a huge fan of your show for your mailbag episode. Who else can we bring in to kick field goals? Thanks." And I thank you, Jay. And so I went diving in. Look, I'll say this. I like Joey Slye. I think what he brings. I like what he brings. I think he had some more consistent spots than others, right? It was kind of ironic. The perfect month of November, and then he gets a special teams player of the month and just kind of, I wouldn't say fell apart completely, but I mean, it wasn't great, right? And that's kind of where this question comes from. So who's out there on the market that the Washington Commanders could potentially look at to bring in as competition for old Joey Slye? So we've got 2 veteran options, and we've got 2 options diving into the NFL draft. Obviously, kickers, you're usually looking, you want kind of late round guys, maybe a 5th rounder if you have an extra 5th in your pocket, but typically you're looking at 6th or 7th round draft picks. But Mason Crosby is an interesting one, the free agent out of the Green Bay Packers. And I'm going to say this because this is Mason Crosby. At the time that we went live, Mason Crosby was a free agent, because I can't imagine this dude is just going to go unemployed. My understanding of the situation is that Mason he still wants to play. The Green Bay Packers, certainly in some of the conversations they've had and comments they've made in the open market, like they seem to like they want to bring him back. The question, as always, is money. And I can't imagine anything with Mason is going to happen until everything happens with Aaron Rodgers and the fallout of all that and how much money is going to be left on the Packers books and all this other stuff. So Mason Crosby, look, if he's available, you bring him in. And is that really competition for Joey, or is Joey now competition for Mason? I mean, Mason Crosby has been one of the best kickers in the National Football League for a long time and doing it in one of the most hazardous environments to do it in. On top of that, another free agent option, Zane Gonzalez. And yes, guys, he is a former Carolina Panther, but he's not one of those former Carolina Panthers. Wasn't there when Ron Rivera was there. So that's just kind of a happy coincidence. Look, full disclosure, I don't know if you guys see the hoodie that I'm wearing today. It's an Arizona State hoodie. That's my alma mater. That's the school that I love the most. Zane Gonzalez is an Arizona State product. That is not why I have him on the list. Look, Zane's been injured a few times in his career, and oftentimes those injuries have derailed kind of his tenure with other teams. But when he is healthy, I feel like he has been a very solid kicker. If he can get some consistency, get his foot on solid ground, potentially turn into somebody who could be a long-term option potentially for an NFL team. So Zane Gonzalez and Joey Slye, that would be a legitimate competition. Like who's going to be the guy that comes out on top of that one? That would be a very interesting battle to kind of take a look at. Looking at the draft, you've got two kickers here. Maryland's Chad Ryland, the lower ranked of the two kickers here on the list, but again, maybe a 6th round type of pick that you bring in, a guy that, look, you might be able to stash on your practice squad. You know what I mean? I don't know, but kickers kind of a hot commodity. So if he has a really good preseason and shows some leg in front of people and in front of the television cameras, he may get swooped off of that practice squad. But maybe, you bring him in again, competition. Joey Slye comes in as the leader in the clubhouse, but if Chad Ryland can do enough to kind of unseat him, then perhaps you see that change happen. And then you have Jake Moody out of Michigan, who, according to some people, is the top ranked kicker in this year's NFL draft class. Again, out of Michigan, I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I don't scout kickers. Okay. I don't, there is a process there. And I did listen to some episodes of some good, like Roberto Aguayo was on there kind of talking about his struggles and everything that he went through and some of the things that Dustin Hopkins was doing. You guys are familiar with him. Like there's definitely more into being an NFL kicker than I am aware of, but I can't tell you that I sat down and watched Jake Moody's tape from his time in Michigan, and here's why, and here's the the leg swing angle and all these other things. I wish I could, but I simply can't. So, but going off the PFF rankings and other guys who do this kind of stuff on a regular basis, Jake Moody, the highest ranked kicker in this year's NFL draft class. So if you're looking for competition there, then either of those two guys draft pick, and you're going to spend draft capital, but that's kind of where you want to spend your 6th round pick. Like if you're going to spend a 6th round pick, you do it on a guy that's probably a developmental guy. Bring him in, he'll compete for a spot eventually, but not necessarily right away. Or you go all out and you go the veteran route. Look, Mason Crosby, I mean, if there's a kicker out there that's a free agent that can make some noise for a fan base, Mason Crosby might just be it. So great question there from Jay. Absolutely. Joey Slye should have some competition in camp this year. Competition is great for everybody, but especially when you're a player at a position, you've kind of proven that you can have hot and cold streaks. Let's see if we can bring a guy in that only has hot streaks. So I appreciate that question. Appreciate all the questions submitted. Try to hit a few of avenues. We went to Twitter. We went to the YouTube comment section. We went to the email box. Again, we got more. We got some more on Twitter, some more in the email boxes. Appreciate all of you guys for submitting. I haven't deleted them. I've got them saved. You know what I mean? They're in the inbox. They're waiting for the next mailbag episode. Want to try to do these on Wednesday afternoons. So if you guys want to be a part of it, if you enjoyed it, please submit your questions in any of a multitude of ways, including starting today on Friday, a program called Subtext, where you and I can converse back and forth. You'll get access to me like nobody else does beyond this program, beyond what happens on Locked On Commanders. If you want to check it out, you get 2 weeks free. Just look for the Subtext link down in the show description of this very broadcast, or text HTTC to 202-760-2644. Again, 202-760-2644. Just text HTTC and hit me up in the text box. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first watch or your first listen of the day. Now make your second the Locked On NFL scouting show with the draft dudes. From free agency to draft, salary cap management, and more. Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I will be back on Monday with Mock Draft Monday. We've got some listener submissions, mock draft submissions that we need to go over. So we're going to hit those as well. And we're going to check in with Damian and Keith from over at Locked On NFL Draft as well. If you want to get in on the fun, send me your mock drafts via email at lockedoncommanders@gmail.com or on Twitter, either at the LO Commanders or at my personal D Harrison82 DMs, both of which are open. Or text me your mock draft, screenshot it, and shoot it over to me on a text. Again, that's 202-760-2644. I've got some interesting things coming up for those of you who join the subtext. Again, some content that nobody else is going to have access to. So join me over there when you are ready. Signing off today, I'm David Harrison, staff writer for Commander Country, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. Find me here, find me there, or find me on Twitter at dharrison82. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, especially this weekend, the weather is getting nicer. But guys, don't take advantage of it, but don't take too much of advantage. Still, be safe, keep your head on a swivel, be kind to one another, and I'll see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.